It's not my fault. I've been busy fighting off all those casino debtors. Now I gotta save up to have my blade fixed.
Well, we studied the cup, he studied the blade.
So help me, I wish someone would bust that King Dice one. What?
Bust him one.
Give him a bust. Give his bust a bust, you know what I'm saying?
Create a finely crafted bust of his head. And then bust him over the head with it.
Cuphead, the only game where an elderly kettle gives you some special juice so you can gain superpowers. Skip, 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 I don't care. Give us your juice.
Thanks for the juice, old man. The future is now.
When I was a kid, one of my favorite places to watch TV was on the wonderful channel known as Boomerang. For those of you who are unaware, Boomerang was a channel that had one sole purpose: play retro cartoons. Stuff like Looney Tunes, The Flintstones, and Scooby-Doo. By far my favorite show to watch on Boomerang, besides the odd Justice League Unlimited showing, was Tom and Jerry. Now because Tom and Jerry are both a cat and a mouse respectively, they can't actually talk. Because of this, most every episode goes without any dialogue whatsoever. But you honestly wouldn't be able to tell if you weren't looking out for it, because the visual storytelling is just phenomenal, especially since the art from that era was so beautiful. So all thanks to Tom and Jerry and Boomerang, I have nostalgia linked to old 30s and 40s cartoons. Why do I bring all this up? Well, because the wonderful people over at Studio MDHR decided to make a game with the same art style. So you can bet your butt this game was hotly anticipated the moment it got announced back in 2013. It did release in 2017, so I realize I'm pretty late to the party, but Steam just released a new feature that allows for online play, so that's why I'm reviewing it. For those confused by the title of this video, I review co-op games, or rather co-op in games. Basically, I review games based on their experience being played with friends, and how to get you set up to play for yourself. As always, these reviews are sorted into the good, the bad, and the co-op. And let's get started by talking about the good. In Cuphead, bosses are the name of the game. The majority of the 10-ish hours you'll be spending completing this game is in boss fights, otherwise known as a boss rush. And luckily, the bosses are one of the best things about Cuphead. From a knockoff Dr. Wily controlled robot to a literal ghost train and a rat who drives a tin can, each one of them has their own unique gameplay footprint that makes overcoming them a big challenge. And a big challenge they are indeed. Not only do you have to learn their attack patterns, to which some of them turn into straight up bullet hells, but you also need to have quick reflexes to be able to navigate through them. There's also no way to regen health while in the midst of a fight, so all of that together creates a very brutal and unforgiving experience. And because it's so hard, it'll probably take you a while to beat a boss. But it doesn't actually feel like that, because when it's all said and done, a boss only really takes around 2 to 3 minutes to beat if you've actually mastered it. So even if you were really close to beating one and died, you didn't really lose that much time. This builds a really nice just one more time mentality that keeps you from being too frustrated. And I think that's the real genius behind Cuphead's design. It's intended to be brutal and unforgiving whilst also being as fair and consistent as possible to mitigate as many frustrations as possible, which there are a couple ways that the game does this. The first of which are the controls. While the game is technically formatted like a 2D platformer, it certainly doesn't feel like Mario. Every input feels very responsive, and you don't feel slippery, so there isn't any need to compensate for anything. I guess I'm just explaining the meaning of the term tight controls, so yeah, it has that.
You should just like toggle the shooting button to always be on, because when would you let go?
I don't know.
All right. This game is aging us already.
The second thing is how the game has a really consistent set of rules. The only things you'll need to know are the mechanics explained in the tutorial, which takes like all of 2 minutes to complete. So instead of having to be on guard about the game slowly introducing new game mechanics throughout your experience, you know exactly what to expect and how to deal with things accordingly, so long as you can react fast enough. There is one boss that's the exception to this, but it's not a deal breaker. Pretty much all you'll ever need to know is how to shoot, jump, and parry. And what is parrying? I'm so glad you asked, because it's the best feature in your entire arsenal. The act of parrying something is simply by jumping and then jumping again off of anything colored pink. And I mean literally anything. It could be a projectile, it could be a walking playing card, it could be a floating question mark, it could even be a jewel imbued in an anchor that's lodged inside the head of a giant octopus. The reason you'd want to parry things is 1, it acts as a double jump, and 2, it charges up your super. Now because it requires you to time your parry, a risk versus reward scenario is produced. Should you risk it and try and parry that projectile coming at you, potentially putting you in danger? Or should you just dodge it and sacrifice progress to getting your super? It's up to you to decide. The last thing that parrying provides is the ability to revive your co-op companion. Basically, if you run out of hit points, you turn into a ghost that starts ascending up and off of the screen. However, if your partner is fast enough, it's possible to parry your ghost to bring you back to life. I know this might sound dumb, but this is actually really important. See, when you're playing in co-op, bosses have more health than they would in regular single player, so it's in your best interest to keep your friend alive so you can deal the most amount of damage possible. Pair this with the double jump effect that parrying has, and you can pull off some pretty crazy stunts.
It just means you'll have to beat the...
Yep. Whoa, wait, yes!
Bruh.
The last good thing I'd like to talk about is the presentation. If you've been eyeing this game, it's probably because of its stunning art style. Not only does it feature amazing, fully hand-drawn and traditionally animated assets, but it also contains a fantastic soundtrack with live performed instruments. As an added layer of polish, it even has a film grain effect over everything, and it slightly muffles the audio to make it not only look like a 30s cartoon, but also sound like one too. The game is so gosh dang beautiful, I almost don't even want to play it. I just want to watch it. I would say they need to make a TV show out of this, but they're already doing that, so I don't even need to. Now, I know I've already said that Cuphead's got some genius design, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. And a perfect example of that is that some bosses have something called randomized moving platforms. Consistency is very obviously an important pillar of the game's design, which is why having these is incredibly baffling. First, let me explain what I mean by randomized moving platforms. Basically, instead of having just a regular old floor, you have moving platforms that hover over a bottomless pit, which scroll either horizontally in the case of the dragon fight, or vertically in the queen bee encounter. Scrolling platforms in and of themselves aren't a big deal, but when you add an element of randomness to them is where we reach some rough waters. Now, instead of only having to pay attention to the boss and the attacks coming from said boss, you also have to keep an eye out for the next safe landing zone, which when you have a game focused on having you learn attack patterns and getting better over trial and error, it's really frustrating having a random element thrown in there to give a slight unfair imbalance. And it's far worse in the aforementioned Queen Bee boss because the platforms are so visually similar to the background. It becomes difficult to tell whether or not you're going to land on something when you're in the thick of it. I think a simple color change to the platforms would have gone a long way. Oh my.
That's not too.
Where am I supposed to go?
You should have dodged to the right, I think.
Yeah.
Grant, you just need to be positive. If you believe in yourself, we can beat her.
Speaking of visual issues, here's one that I wouldn't have expected to be a problem. Part of the art style in Cuphead is to have 3 separate layers on screen at once. The background, which is usually a watercolor painting or something, the middle ground, which is where you play in, and the foreground, the stuff that goes in front of the middle ground. The reason for this setup is the want for parallax, basically making it look like a scene has depth. In a less crowded level, this isn't an issue, but when you're fighting a boss with a ton of projectiles, the foreground layer can be a huge distraction. And in some cases, it can even get in the way and block view of attacks, which is entirely unacceptable. The sound of a man trying his best. Now, I know Cuphead is described as a boss rush, but there is actually more to the game than just bosses. There's a fun little hub world that has some quirky characters, and there are some things called run and gun levels. These run and gun levels are structured more like a traditional side-scrolling shoot-'em-up instead of a single screen affair. Now, bringing these up in the bad section implies that these won't be good, but I'm more lukewarm on them. I wouldn't call them bad, but I wouldn't call them super enjoyable either. Now, I don't mean to put the art direction down by any means. It's fantastic in every single corner of this game, but I just find these levels pretty unremarkable. It just doesn't feel like there's as much wild creativity with how the levels flow, so they just kind of end up feeling like filler. But they are 100% optional, so if you don't like them as well, you can just skip them. There is one reason why you want to play through them though, and that's to get coins. The only way to get coins is by playing these levels, which in turn you can go and spend at Porkrind's Emporium. Here you can buy abilities that range from different types of attacks to passive abilities like getting an extra hit point or a different kind of dash.
No, pea sugar. That's what they used to call me, but that's not true.
Where did they used to call you that?
Prison.
Well, I mean, at least you're honest. On the surface, all of these seem to have their uses, and they also have trade-offs, so it seems pretty balanced. But when you start to use these abilities, it becomes abundantly clear that some of them are essential, and a lot of them are utterly useless. For example, the smoke bomb ability is incredibly useful. Basically, it makes it so you're invincible while you dash, with the slight trade-off that it makes you invisible mid-dodge, which being invisible isn't really that big of a thing to get used to since you travel the same distance every time. The problem with this is that any other passive ability that's in the store becomes worthless because I would never ever want to switch off of my smoke bomb. I think a fix would either be nerf the smoke bomb or make it an upgrade to your character so you can at least have a little bit of desire to try out the other passives. I think I only really have one problem with how playing with a friend works in this game, and it's super minor. Because Cuphead and Mugman look decently similar to each other when you aren't looking too hard at them, confusion can arise as to which one you are when there's a lot going on in a fight. It's not a groundbreaking issue, but it definitely has caused a couple deaths. Yeah, well, they change patterns. You good there?
A lot of stress, man.
Yeah, I know.
Yep.
Wow, okay, I'm good. I don't know how I'm good, but I'm good.
Wow!
Everything else about it works great though. Not only are the co-op specific mechanics like the revive feature really great, but I think the overall atmosphere that co-op Cuphead provides is amazing. I think just the simple act of having another person taking part in a difficult game with you instantly makes it less frustrating and more fun. Dying when you play single player is generally pretty annoying, but when you're with a friend, you're able to laugh it off and have a good time. And trying to keep each other alive just adds to the fun. You've got your ult, by the way.
Yeah. Ah!
No!
Ah!
I tried.
Now you're probably thinking, this is great, but like, how do you play an online co-op? There's a very simple and yet also kind of disappointing answer to that. As of writing, Steam just launched a beta for something called Remote Play Together. Basically, it allows you to invite your friends to play local multiplayer games online using Valve's video streaming tech with the push of a single button. And before you groan in disappointment, unlike the other third-party attempts at something like this, Remote Play Together seems to work incredibly well. It's super easy to set up, too. It's as simple as just right-clicking on your friend and pressing Remote Play Together. There doesn't seem to be too much input lag, and the visuals don't really seem to take too much of a hit either. On top of that, only one person needs to own the given game that you're playing. This is great news for PC folks, but it's sad news for console players. I currently know of no such solution for my lovely console buds, but there is still local co-op, so if you and your friend live close to each other, you could still invite them over. Cuphead is a visual and auditory masterpiece that has a gameplay backbone that supports it so well that it makes it feel like you're literally playing a cartoon. There's so much that it achieves with such care and attention to detail that despite its setbacks, it's 100% worth playing through. And I think the optimal way to play through it is with a friend. So to answer the question, should you play Cuphead in co-op? Absolutely. And if you do get the game, I beg you to grab a friend to play it with you. I'm TheAmazinggap, and thanks for watching.